Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Betsy Cahill. I'm Vice Chair of the Board of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and I am Chair Emerita of the Preservation Society of Charleston. Before I begin today, I want to take a moment to recognize that this is Veterans Day, and to note that the freedoms that our men and women fought for are the very freedoms that this festival celebrates, so we thank them with our whole hearts. We also thank with our whole hearts the sponsors for today's conversation, Lee Bell and Photius Pantazis, and the Rodney B. and Marjorie S. Fink Foundation. Now, please turn off your cell phones and double check if you're not sure. And please also visit our speakers today after the event in the aptly named Signing Lounge at the theater's box office, where they will be signing books. Any introducer who is greeted by two such voluminous resumes as those of Paul Goldberger and Tony Wood may be given full license to cherry pick. It is in fact a necessity. There is no way I could do justice to their manifold accomplishments in 3 minutes. But I can assure you that there are no two human beings more qualified to talk about architecture, historic preservation, beauty in the city, and advocacy, all themes touched on in Tony's biography of that exemplary civic hero and servant of beauty, Albert Bard. First, Paul Goldberger, contributing editor at Vanity Fair, formerly architecture critic at The New Yorker, and before that, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist at The New York Times. He is the author of many books, among others, Why Architecture Matters and Ballpark, Baseball in the American City. He was a trusted counselor to Richard Moe, the legendary head of the National Trust, and to many others, including the students at the New School, whom he will be teaching at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Perhaps less well-known is Paul's weird fondness, that's his phrase, for cars and car design, which he satisfies vicariously every morning by spending a moment or two perusing a favorite auction website for collectible cars. Tony Wood, erudite, tenacious, occasionally incorrigible, and always possessed of an opinion when it comes to preservation, and pretty much anything else. Author of Preserving New York, about the passage of New York's landmarks law, he has been a ubiquitous presence in that city's kaleidoscopic preservation world. The creation of the New York Preservation Archive is one of his notable successes in promoting preservation efforts, and especially their documentation, around the country. An advisor to numerous nonprofits here and elsewhere, mentor to many, including me, and a stalwart supporter of Drayton Hall, where he served on the board for many years. Not long ago, Paul observed in an interview that every great city is a combination of planning and accidents, or to put it another way, between intention and serendipity. Certainly, that is true of the beautiful and great city of Charleston. To Paul's recipe for urban greatness, I would add one other ingredient: effective preservation advocacy. A great city needs organizations and people who will stand up and fight for its character and its beauty, because those qualities undergird civic well-being. Great cities, in short, need people like Albert Bard, erudite, tenacious, occasionally incorrigible, and always possessed of an opinion, especially when it came to billboards. We're fortunate to have these two latter-day bards here for what will undoubtedly be a spirited and wide-ranging conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, in concert, Paul Goldberger and Tony Wood.
Thank you so much, Betsy. I must say you're your research is nearly as thorough as Tony Wood's in his book, which we'll get to in a few minutes. And I hope we'll also have a chance to talk a little bit about Charleston. But let's first focus on this book, because it's such a remarkable story on so many levels. Historic preservation, New York, architecture, civic duty, civic beauty, discipline, human character, the serendipity of life, the nature of family, the irony, to me, of a man who was in so many ways the epitome of gentility and propriety, turning out to have a whole other dimension to his life. But what it's not, and this is really one thing that so impressed me, you have not made it a conventional story of a tortured, closeted gay man who was miserable because he couldn't admit to his preferences. It's both simpler and more complicated than that. And you say at one point in the book that you thought Albert Bard was happy, even though he not only lived with what we might almost call unrequited love, or sort of, and also at one point lost most of his money. So let's talk first about Albert Bard, the person, and then we'll talk about his influence and his enormous, monumental influence on preservation.
Well, Bard, one of the themes in his life is resilience. By the age of 6, he'd lost his mother.
Right.
He lost his 2 older brothers in an epidemic. His father remarries, a widow who has other children. Mm-hmm. So his whole early life is disruption. And the rest of his life is lifelong commitments to whatever he was involved with, right?
Right.
So he kind of figured out how to power through adversity, but he always found moments, in my opinion, of joy. Mm-hmm. So he's down in Washington trying to help solve the problem of his adopted son, Gordon, who was involved in the spy situation we may or may not talk about.
Oh, I hope we do.
Yeah,
yes, right.
And he's down there with Gordon's mother, and they've made appointments with various people, and there's just enough time at the end before catching the train to go to the Lincoln Monument. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in a sense, here he's down there totally focused on business, but he's able to then pull himself out of that. And the same when he's in Paris with this love of his life in one jail, and the young lady Bard's known since she was 7 in another jail, and he's paying for lawyers and running back and forth. He ends up, again, meeting somebody, taking him out to Versailles, playing chess with him at night. I mean, so he was able to actually enjoy being a person in addition to his total commitment to whatever else he was doing.
I mean, an astonishing degree of resilience, it would seem to me.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's, I mean, you might say, why did I spend so many years living mentally with Albert Bard? His life is both instructive as well as inspirational, because he did weather a lot of storms, personally, professionally. It took him over 40 years to get the Bard Act, which is the legal basis of the landmarks law, passed.
Right.
So from 1913 till 1956, he is constantly figuring out ways to advance his signature idea with lots of, how many disappointments are you going to have in over 40 years, right? Till it finally happened.
Right.
And he was a dog with a bone. So he had a resilience, he had the ability to think long term. And to me, and then he took on Robert Moses.
Well,
I mean,
yes,
you know, so all of that makes you think that this is a guy who just has this kind of he's the energetic bunny, you know, that little figure. He's always got full energy and just pursuing it full speed.
And yet there was a quality about him that was so genteel and proper, and that you would never guess other things about. I mean, obviously, neither of us met him in person, but you would assume that that none of this would be instantly visible when you met him. I mean, that
No, I mean,
would
nobody-
seem like this very quiet, proper lawyer who seemed like the sort of person who would be excited by the fine points of contract law or something like that, and would not have a life of such extraordinary drama as well as such passion that would ultimately change New York City and the country in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think his civic passion was evident.
Yeah.
And in fact, he's testifying against some awful building, and he kind of excuses himself in his testimony by saying, oh, I get so passionate about these things. So he really went full bore that way. But in terms of his private life,
right.
I mean, I think his civic colleagues could never imagine the type of domestic life he ended up having as this kind of, ad hoc head of a family.
Right.
Kind of this serving as a grandfather to the children,
right.
And sitting around the breakfast table toasting them with orange juice, or imagining him in the garden. I mean, he was such a New York City civic, figure.
Yes.
Always,
yes.
The suits from London, always proper, as you say. But he was also willing, I think, to be somewhat of a character. And there are all these apocryphal stories of, him ripping illegal ads down. There's a story of being stuck in traffic, and there's a cab, and he opens the cab's door and goes through the cab and exits the cab just because it's blocking traffic. I mean, I couldn't verify that one despite the research. But, so he was willing to kind of be like that.
Okay.
And he certainly, he wrote voluminous letters to the New York Times on every subject you can imagine, on how to pronounce margarine. Do we care? And they would print them. So he was willing to just kind of share his opinions broadly, no matter how out of sync they might be.
Right.
So he didn't hold back, feeling that he might not be part of the dominant thinking of the time. But he certainly presented himself as this just normal kind of guy.
Right. Normal kind of guy, and then until your life and his reputation intersected, a relatively unknown guy who you have been before this book, you've been spending many years helping bring greater attention to him. How did you first encounter Albert Bard?
Well, it was an accident.
Okay.
I was working on a book on the history of how New York got its landmarks law. And the short story for years had been Penn Station is demolished, and out of the ruins of Penn Station emerges the landmarks law.
Right.
And I came to New York in 1978, wanted to do historic preservation, thought if I could read the book, understand the history. There was no book. So I started doing interviews, and it became clear there was a narrative thread well before Penn Station.
Right.
And that thread went back to 1913 and what ultimately became the Bard Act. But realizing that, I now knew there was a longer story, and Bard kept popping up,
right.
Over those years. And in 1999, I learned that his papers were at the New York Public Library. And by then, I knew how important the Bard Act was. So the Bard Act, in order for New York to have a landmarks law, which today protects 38,000 buildings and over 150 historic districts.
And that's the first law of its kind in the nation, first all-encompassing municipal law in a large city.
Right, right. Though, we won't get into the
There were historic districts in New Orleans and other places.
Right, in other places. But so the Bard Act was essential in order for that's Bard's legacy. Is you go to New York and you go to Greenwich Village, you go to Brooklyn Heights, you go to those neighborhoods, they would not look the way they were today if there wasn't the Bard Act. And so when I discovered the importance of this thing called the Bard Act, and I knew his papers were at the New York Public Library, I thought, okay, Saturday afternoon, sent the letter, got my card. I'll just go into his papers and pull out the file on the Bard Act, and I'll understand what that was all about.
Right.
150 boxes of Albert Bard's papers at the New York Public Library, which were largely the way they had been donated. And so they were tied together with little strings, rusty straight pins, I guess paper
So
clips
literally
hadn't been
nobody had actually looked at them in
Not,
these years?
there was a very, very rough finding aid.
Okay.
But it was clear no one had untied the string bundles and removed the rusty pins. They were there for me, which gave me this intimacy
Right.
with Albert Bard. I mean, you know, I was touching the papers he touched. It was, you know, anyway, that started then what turned out to be a 20-plus year experience getting to
Right.
know Albert Bard.
Which you did not anticipate when you
No, and it became a slight problem because at the time I was finishing this book on the history of the landmarks law, which was not supposed to be a history of Albert Bard
Right,
in the
right,
landmarks
right.
law. So I had to suppress the Bard instinct for a while to finish that book, which was hard because at that point I'd also discovered there was more to Albert Bard.
Well, I was about to ask, what was the point at which you discovered that this was, while it is true that he was this, as we've said, very proper lawyer who also was passionate about preservation and had spent years getting the enabling legislation true, that there was also an extraordinary personal story
Yeah.
behind it. When did that?
It's all back to the power of archives, right?
Okay.
So I'm going through these papers now multiple Saturday afternoons, and most of it had been cleansed of any kind of real personal correspondence, but there were some references in letters to people he had worked with about his adopted son and the problems, the medical problems this son was having, and letters that would say, well, how is, you know, I read about the problem and how's it going? So I kind of felt, you know, what do you mean,
What is
adopted
it?
son?
Right,
Because
right.
this guy was this singular, you know, confirmed bachelor, whatever the phrases were, with a life so full. I mean, he was on multiple nonprofit boards for 50 and 60 years and on multiple committees. So it's like, of course, that guy had no time for life, right? Made perfect sense. And here
Right.
are these indications that there's something else. And so I went and looked in the records of who donated 150 boxes of papers if nobody cared, if this guy was just kind of a singular person dying at the age of 96. Was it his ancient secretary who took care of it? No. So we had the papers had been donated by two people back in the early mid-1960s, right? So as a researcher does, you know, we sent letters into the ether to those addresses from that time period expecting nothing.
Right.
And we got a phone call back, and it was a neighbor of the then 90-year-old Marjorie, who was Gordon, the adopted son's wife,
Right.
who had known Bard since she was 6 or 7.
Right.
And the message was, she's blind, but she's totally with it, and she's happy to talk.
Wow.
And so, of course,
Right.
we went to talk. And
So that was, you found the Rosetta Stone, sort of. I mean,
well,
that
the
was,
Rosetta Stone, maybe it was the Rosetta Onion, because it was peeling, it was just layer and layer. And
Right,
so
right.
in her kitchen, the revelation, I mean, we sit there and said, turn on turn on your recorder, turn on your tape recorder. She really wanted to get the story online. And that's when she made it clear what the relationship was between her husband and Bard. And then she proceeded to explain. So it was, I mean, this is kind of the researcher's dream / nightmare, because first was the revelation that indeed she confirmed that there was a homosexual relationship between her husband and Bard, and she commented that she'd gone to Vassar, so she knew all about that. And sadly, I never had a follow-up interview before she died, just
Right.
wanting to understand what course she had taken at Vassar.
Yeah, what she meant by that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
certainly
but
right.
but she was clear, and so I thought, okay, well, that confirmed what I had thought. And then she said, you know, in the 1930s, Bard was not as active in his civic life, which totally contradicted what I knew of how busy he was in the 30s, which was turns out to be why this resilience and is so remarkable. And she said, well, that's when we had our problem. And kind of drum roll, okay. And she said, well, that's when we were arrested as Soviet spies. And of course, my jaw is now on the kitchen floor,
Right,
you know,
right,
and it's kind of, so, and then the icing on the cake was she asked her daughter to go up stairs and get the suitcase at the top of the closet, and proceeded to give us a suitcase full of correspondence that Bard had written to his young couple, as he called them, from when they had been arrested until pretty much just right after Gordon died. And it was one side of the correspondence. It was only Bard's letters to them. And despite efforts, I never could get the other half of the correspondence. But fortunately, Bard was a lawyer. And so his letters are usually along the lines of, in point one of my previous letter, to which you responded as, I now respond Y. So I got enough of the drift to understand. But that's each one of these experiences that opened up new lines of research. So the papers also revealed that he was this iconic figure in the Greek fraternity movement. I mean, he was a god. And again, from a fun, again, that's the researcher comes, out in you. When I realized he'd been this big player, I tracked down Chi Psi fraternity, and they have a national office. There's an email. So I emailed them and I say, you've probably forgotten this guy, but apparently Albert Bard was a big person in your movement. Like that afternoon, I get an email back saying, I write you under a portrait of Albert Bard. So here's a guy who is on these civic groups in New York for 40, 50 years who hardly remember him. And here he is, a live presence in a way still in that other world that he was such a player in. And of course, they had a lot of Bard papers because the papers had gotten to the public library because Marjorie, the 91-year-old I talked to who'd known Bard since she was 7, just to keep the characters straight, she spent weeks when Bard died coming down to his office to go through his papers. The New York Times had done a story on Bard's 95th birthday, and there's this incredible picture of Bard sitting there, and in back of him is a table full of piles of paper. And in back of the paper, those piles are all these file cabinets with papers on top. And that's what Marjorie came down. She knew Bard had a historic value. She had studied history. So she ended up sending papers off to various places. And so the Chi Psi fraternity had a really great archive.
But she left out the letters to her and her husband.
She left out
during the period in Europe when they were in jail.
And I came to understand that she was planning to give those to us. And passed away before it could happen. And those papers were last seen in the back of a pickup truck heading to Texas by one of Marjorie's sons, who I then corresponded with over the years trying to get the papers. And I think he felt the letters really didn't portray his father very well. I think that was part of it. But his father, Gordon, was also just a fascinating person. He apparently he was strikingly beautiful. He was charming. He had, though, behavioral issues to be managed. So he was kind of a damaged beauty, if you will, in a way. And apparently, I did stumble. There were a few letters that found their way into what had been given to me. It just gave me a sense of his narrative.
Given that Bard was such a proper person in so many ways, it sounded like this guy in many ways represented a kind of almost outlaw fantasy or something. He was...
Well, there is the sailor fantasy.
The what?
The sailor fantasy.
Sailor fantasy, or whatever,
Bard, when you read the book, you kind of reach the same conclusion. He was irrationally, from an outside perspective, in love with this young man. And was loyal to him despite everything. Oftentimes as I was researching and learning more, I would just say, what were they thinking? Because the dynamics are so hard to understand. But Bard had a truly romanticized sense of his relationship with Gordon. He wrote poems. The letters are very, very clear about his feelings and his dedication to Gordon and to Gordon's family.
And did Gordon reciprocate at all, or not really? How much do we know?
It's hard to tell. Not having those letters. I think he did. I think he did. clearly there was a meaningful relationship there. The other thing, though, that I kind of wonder at times is when you read the correspondence, the level of detail that Bard might have been perceived as an intrusive presence in their lives, because these letters go into such minutia. Did the boys get their shots? Did you buy the letter? Did you buy the ladder? They were living off the grid in a cabin in upstate New York. Did you buy the safety ladders so the kids could climb out if there was a fire? Did you get the tires changed? This ongoing stream of focused detail.
Yeah, he was kind of like combination paterfamilias and nanny.
Yeah, the roles were totally mixed.
And how it segued from this sort of romantic relationship to his becoming the kind of elder figure in this larger family.
Yeah, the romantic,
so odd.
When I say romantic, I will say romanticized.
Right, that's a better word.
To the end of Gordon's life, the letters, Bard's narrative to him and his romanticized, these letters he'll write, it's, Gordon, I'm sitting at your, at a certain point, Bard moved out of New York into the Switz family home in East Orange. And one of the letters is like, I'm sitting at your desk writing this letter to you. And there would be these, it was just, he would create this emotional connection, or like, it's your birthday today, are you thinking of me? Or it's my birthday, it's, I remember so many years ago when we first met. So he very much, he was living in a romanticized version of that relationship, which worked for him. Despite reality coming in. So it was, but it really made, it really rounded out Bard's life. Right.
Which otherwise would not have been full in an emotional way, in that same way. And it meant that historic preservation, with which he also had a very deep emotional connection, obviously, was not the sum total of the emotional side of his life.
No, Bard had, there were like three pillars in Bard's life.
Yeah.
There was Chi Psi fraternity, his fraternity that was very much a social focus for him from the day he matriculated at Amherst till the day he died. He was Chi Psi, he was national fraternity. That was a very important part of his life. Then there was the civic life he had. And it was the Municipal Art Society, it was a civic club, it was a union club, 50 years the secretary of one, 40, all of this stuff. Any one of these silos would fill any other person's entire life, right? And then the third piece of his life was the Switz family. And it was Gordon, it was Marjorie, then it was Albert Bard Switz, the first son named after him. And then it was taking care of that family as it evolved and navigating their interaction with the FBI and kind of being that buffer. He was the he was damage control. He was damage control for the entire Switz family.
Yeah, it's very good, I guess, to have a lawyer in the household if you're going to be a spy.
It helps. It helps. Unfortunately, they didn't consult Bard before they went on the spying path. I think he would have helped.
But he never ever broke with them. He remained loyal all the way through.
He remained loyal to them all the way until his dying day. Marjorie was with him when he died. And so that really continued. But to me, part of the inspiring thing about Bard is he had these three silos of life. Occasionally they would spill into each other. But so there's this moment in 1938 where he's madly trying to get the Young family, which has been in Europe, and they finally were released from jail, they float around. They finally settle down as the Nazis emerge. So Bard is now trying to get them home. At the same time, he's taking the train to Albany to try and get the Bard Act advanced in 1938. So he's juggling these two things.
Talk about gifts for compartmentalization.
Yeah,
he was the king of compartmentalization, I would say. Before we talk about preservation, which we really, of course, want to talk about, I have one other quick question about Bard, which is that in addition to these three silos, did he have any paying clients as a lawyer?
Well,
how did he pay the bills?
that's such a good question, because he did have a law firm, or he had a law practice with a legal partner,
Right.
And neither of them showed much inclination, because his law partner, Calkins, was the mayor of Plainsfield, New Jersey,
Right.
and was a great figure in the world of golf. Like he invented the part. He's in the Golf Hall of Fame
Right.
in New Jersey, and so he's Bard's legal partner, and
Right.
Bard is like doing all these civic things. When they did, it was like a corporate practice. I mean, I looked at some of the books. The ledgers are at the New York Public with the business. They had real clients.
They did have some real.
They did
right,
real
right,
clients,
right.
but I don't know that they had to rely on. Bard ended up, before the crash, Bard was a millionaire.
Right.
Now, he didn't live like that. I mean, he was, he lived modestly when you consider the
Yes.
resources he had. He's really generous with them for others. So there was, and then there was family money that oftentimes he would inherit something. So he was basically, after the crash, he was really, reduced financially. And this was at the same time that then the whole spy problem emerges, and Bard is trying to find money to hire lawyers and
Right,
go to
right.
Paris.
And his own
and
resources had shrunk.
Yes, but
yes.
the nice thing was that finally, some of the worthless stock that he hadn't dumped, suddenly, for reasons he never understood, somebody was buying it up. And so he was able to sell it. And over the years, he had given a chunk to Gordon. He had given a chunk to Gordon's mother. And finally, this worthless stock now was worth, tens of thousands of dollars. And there is this letter that he writes, because Gordon and Marjorie and the kids are living basically off the grid in rural upstate New York, west of Kingston. And there's this letter kind of saying, well, maybe you should think of getting a few improvements for Marjorie, like a washing machine or a stove. But it's like we can upgrade things, right? And I do think, back to your propriety and
Yes, yes,
there was a
yes.
letter he wrote basically saying something along the lines of, just because you're living in the country, you shouldn't let yourselves go. It was
Right. Yes, no, he does strike me in some ways as the sort of man who would have, if he were in the country, worn a suit and tie to breakfast.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he would. I mean, there are a couple of rare photos of him in a sweater. But I think the sweaters were knitted by somebody, so he kind of had to wear them. But no, he had his suits made in London. And it's interesting, later on, there's this correspondence of his suits are being cut down and reshaped as clothing for the kids. So I don't know how to do that type of stuff, but somebody did.
Right.
But he was, he was presentable all the way.
So, Tony, who's going to play him in the movie?
Well, when I started this years ago, it was, let me see if I can pull it out. It was going to be Sean Connery was going to be Bard, and a young Leonardo DiCaprio was going to be Gordon. Well, that doesn't work anymore. Time, for a variety of reasons. So time has passed. So lately, I've been thinking of, is it Timothée Chalamet?
Okay.
I'm thinking of him as Gordon.
As Gordon, okay.
And I haven't settled yet on who's going to do Bard. But I'm open to suggestions.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Now I want to be sure that we actually get to the heart of the matter, which is his impact on historic preservation, which is monumental, not just in New York, but elsewhere, particularly in New York, but to some extent elsewhere as well. Do you know how his passion for that began?
No, I mean, he grew up in Norwich, Connecticut, which, according to the town's promotional history, at one time had more millionaires than any other town in America. Other towns, I think, have questioned that. And I mention that because it is a beautiful town still.
Right.
And so he grew up.
A mill town, probably.
Yes,
right?
it's right up on the Thames River, I think they call it.
Right,
there.
the Thames.
And so it had, it had sailing stuff going on. It had the rivers coming together with manufacturing. So it was a very robust city with a lot of wealth and a lot of beauty. I mean, so his walk to school was up what is today through a historic district, past the church with the two memorial windows for his brothers who died, to the academy that he went to, that his father had helped start and on the board of. So he grew up in a small town like that, and he never lost his affection or connection to Norwich. Right. He was a member of the Norwich Society in New York, whose papers still exist, as you can imagine. So he would come back and give talks. So he never like cut his ties there. So that was part of it. And he went to Amherst. So it's, I think he just enjoyed, the book, Sermon of Beauty. I mean, beauty in Gordon, beauty in the landscape, beauty in architecture, and anything that was against beauty, Bard was against, hence his hatred of billboards.
Yes, I was about to ask you about that.
I mean,
yes.
he didn't hook up. He partnered with Elizabeth Lawton, a wonderful lady who deserves a book of her own, who was this national leader who started these national roadside councils in various states battling billboards. Because this is a moment when highways are rolling out across America, and they could be beautiful scenic highways, or they could have billboards. And so Bard was her legal, he ran the legal side, she kind of was the face of the organization. Wonderful correspondence between the two of them, because she was kind of out of the Women's Garden Club movements, was very proper herself, was an advocate, but there were lines she wouldn't cross. Bard, on the other hand, was a much more aggressive advocate. And there's one exchange of letters where he's kind of slightly apologizing for beating her up for being so wimpy.
I remember that from the book, yes.
Yeah, and he writes back to her apologetically, but then he says, the Christians were not going to tea parties in the Colosseum. So he was he believed in aggressive advocacy.
Yeah.
Highly opinionated, sharp wit, and hugely articulate. Series of letters to a parks commissioner in New York that basically end with the parks commissioner writing back saying, there's no point dealing with you until you get a civil tongue in your head, because Bard was just, peppering him. So he was a very strong and motivated advocate. And so billboards were really his bête noire. But signage, signage in all forms. Billboards were particularly egregious around the country and the world, but he really got he really started battling billboards in New York. That 1913 report that was referenced, where the origin of the Bard Act and the Landmarks Law is in a sense, intellectually in that document.
Right. So what did the Bard Act actually say, and why did it take so long to happen?
So the Bard Act basically said that government has the right to regulate private property on aesthetic considerations. Mm-hmm. And when Bard kind of crafted this in 1913, that was like a concept that came from Mars. It was like totally
That was
there.
before the first zoning laws even, which were 1916.
Right. And Bard was very disappointed that the 1960 zoning law didn't include this. Mm-hmm. One of a series of disappointments over the years.
Right.
So that was then something he just kept trying to advance. And New York State had a system, I don't know if we still have it, where every 20 years the state considers whether there should be a state constitutional amendment. And that would have been the opportunity, in Bard's mind, to take this and embed it in the Constitution, which would then have given cities around the state the authority, if they wished, to have a law that would regulate, right? And so in 1915 he tried, in 1938 he tried, so it kept happening. So he was decades ahead of the conventional thinking. And that's, again, another reason that I think he's so inspirational today for people involved in civic work and historic preservation, is he played the long game.
Right.
That type of systemic change takes decades. And he was fighting specific battles we'll talk about with Moses, but at the same time he was looking for a system solution that would eliminate having to fight all those individual battles. So he was playing it at both of those levels. And it was finally in 1954,
right,
not when Penn Station was threatened, but when Grand Central Station was threatened.
First threatened, right.
It was first threatened. That Bard was reacted to that, kind of just saying, I'm going to go ahead and take another shot at this thing, and he drafted it. And through connections he had, it got introduced in Albany in 55 and ultimately passed in 1956.
Right.
So in 1956, New York actually had the authority to have a landmarks law, which it didn't get till 1965, but that's a different story.
Right, although it is true, I mean, you're right, of course, that Penn Station has been falsely and simplistically associated with the passage of it, but it was, in a way, kind of the tipping point.
Oh, it was the gas on the fire.
Yeah, right.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
It was the thing that finally led people to say, we can't take this anymore.
No,
We
exactly.
need to do something.
And I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to establish it had a prehistory was basically also to establish the fact that, in a sense, New Yorkers have been trying to manage change ever since change keeps going on in New York, right? So oftentimes preservation has been criticized in New York as that's so non-New York. New York is all about change. That's the DNA of the city. And I would argue that is certainly a strong part of the DNA, but there's an equal piece of DNA, which is basically a desire to manage change, to keep the best of the past. And that's kind of what ultimately the landmarks law allows the city to do.
Right. And we've been doing that now for 60 years this year.
Big celebration, 60th anniversary.
60th anniversary, exactly. We will reconvene at the 70th and discuss.
I have to have good handicapped access wherever we're meeting.
What it's amounted to. Well, what's your, as a preservationist, what is your sense? We know your sense of Bard's enormous impact of the landmarks law itself, which of course he did not live to see the passage of, right?
No, he didn't. So he died in 1963.
Right,
and
2
the
years
law,
before.
right, and
he died as Penn Station was being torn down, however.
Well, he did, and in fact, there's a wonderful brief story in the book that his life's coming together. He is at a big Chi Psi annual conference, and on the dais where he is sitting as the honored guy is the head of the Penn Station Railroad Company. That is trying to demolish it. So, I mean, if one could have if you're going to have dinner with several people, one of those questions, I would like Bard and Greennow there, because it was interesting to see if they broke the fraternity, code and actually talked about, why are you trying to tear down Penn Station?
Right. Well, it would be a great scene in the movie, though.
There we go. Yeah, note to file. But back to the law itself. He didn't see it, but actually Syracuse, I think, used the law first. So that he would have been aware of. He was very involved, even now in his 90s, in the advocacy efforts trying to get New York to do the law. So there was a big, Greenwich Village has always been a wonderful hotbed of preservation. Since like the beginning of time. And so they were suffering from all sorts of change that was really upsetting the villagers. And so there's great energy there. And so they launched...
Robert Moses having wanted to, and Jane Jacobs fighting against that and so forth. Yes.
But they launched a petition drive to try and convince Mayor Wagner to use the Bard Act to have a landmarks law. The first person who signed that petition was Albert Bard. So Bard was still that active and was still that plugged in to the kind of grassroots advocacy stuff that was creating a political climate that ultimately, with the loss of Penn Station and then several other losses right after that, the Brokaw mansions, it just turned up the heat so much that Wagner ultimately had to, his city was out of control. So he had to basically sign the law.
Right. Although in its original form it was pretty weak. It had as many loopholes as Swiss cheese.
It did. But even with the loopholes, when Wagner signed that, he basically said, and if this causes any problems, we'll amend it right away. And so one would have thought historically that with all this kind of pent-up demand to protect neighborhoods, save these buildings, you would have thought once the law landed, the Landmarks Commission would have come out of the gate 100 miles an hour. Instead, they realized that they were on very weak grounds. It was an untested law. And so the commission proceeded very conservatively in its early days.
Right.
And some of us might say it's reverted to that today. But
Well, yes, but that's a whole other discussion.
That's right.
I want us to be able to talk a tiny bit before we open to questions about his relationship to Robert Moses, which is an interesting one, and then also a little bit about Charleston. So let's.
Well, we'll do Moses quickly.
Yes.
So Bard fought Moses twice successfully. Right. Again, at the same time, he's dealing with all these family issues. Bard is 72 when he helps lead the charge to try and stop the Brooklyn Battery Bridge, which was a pet project of Moses. And he succeeded in stopping that, and then Moses came back.
Converted to a tunnel.
Right, that was the second battle, and Bard is part of the leaders fighting that. So he's fighting Moses on all of these things when most people would prefer to be in a rocking chair on a beautiful porch in Charleston, right? But he's on the front lines fighting. But he had a very mixed relationship with Moses because they had one thing in common that they both shared, and they both hated billboards. Right. Moses didn't want billboards on the highways he was building.
Right.
And Bard didn't want billboards anywhere. Right. And so he couldn't totally dismiss Moses as a problem. But I mean, in his letters, there's letters he refers, so Moses and Mayor LaGuardia were kind of hooked at the hips on a lot of projects. And there's letters where he's writing where he refers to that SOB Robert Moses and that stinkweed. Because LaGuardia was the little flower. In Bard's letter, he's the little cauliflower, he's the stinkweed. I mean, Bard lays it out on the line.
Yeah, but he was not shy, clearly.
No, Bard was very generous in sharing his opinions.
Right, clearly. So he never went to Charleston, so far as you know, did he?
I think he might have. I don't have a lot of documentation. He knew what was going on in Charleston because all these years that he's been trying to find a legal basis for the landmarks law, he has been looking for examples. And what had happened what the Charleston law in the 30s didn't solve the problem for New York.
Right.
The Vieux Carré was thought to be a closer model.
In New Orleans, right.
And so he was in correspondence with the legal folks in New Orleans to see if they had solved it in a way that New York could solve it. And again, it didn't fit the legal circumstances in New York. But Bard traveled extensively. So I'm pretty sure he probably came to Charleston because he's obviously going to all these conferences.
Yeah.
And even back then, conferences were coming to Charleston.
Yeah, right. Before we open up to questions, one more question quickly, if you can, even though this could fill a whole afternoon if we wanted it to. How has Charleston done in terms of preservation recently?
I would have to say Charleston is blessed to have a population that is so committed and concerned about shepherding the future of the city. So I think, Charleston is, there are very few cities in America that have two robust preservation organizations, which is,
most don't have one.
Well, yeah,
right.
That's right. So I think there's a real preservation culture here, but I question as Charleston continues to evolve, and as Charleston is marketed more as a place you come for your bridezilla party or whatever those things are, and you come here to just eat and drink and party. I think the worry is, the heart and soul of Charleston, is not bridesmaids parties. It is shocking. I know. I'll be let out of town by the Visitors Bureau. But I think it's the history. So I'm worried that the historic narrative potentially can be overcome, and I think that has
if we can
challenges.
make a New Orleans analogy, you worry that it will become less Garden District and more Bourbon Street, perhaps.
Well, I think there's that potential. I think there.
But they did stop the cruise ships.
Well, there was one I saw the other day, but it is it's wonderfly under control. There's so much exciting things going on in Charleston, but on the other hand, development can get out of control. And certainly a lot of the new construction around Charleston is so non-Charleston. None of this is new to anyone in the audience. Charleston is you can't take anything for granted. Yeah. And I think that's always the worry when it comes to preservation. And I think we're having that issue back in New York. I think it's an interesting moment. And I think maybe just to try and bring some of this to a close is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about telling the history of preservation and people like Bard is I think there's a whole generation who is not aware of what land use regulations, planning, preservation have offered.
Right.
And so there's kind of new abundance conversation going on politically, which is kind of, let's get rid of any regulation so we can just build, and that'll solve our housing problems. And they don't understand why we have what we
Right.
have and what it's done for us.
Which is part of a much larger distrust of regulation
Yeah.
in the society in general. Let's open it up to a few questions before we run out of time for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I could ask anyone just to raise their hand and wait for a microphone to arrive, and it's already arrived right there. So please.
Thank you so much. I feel quite sure that I know what your reaction to these two words are going to be, but I just would love to hear it. The East Wing.
I would like to think that perhaps the East Wing could be the demolition of Penn Station in terms of a moment to remind Americans that we have a history, that it is threatened. And I think the problem in Washington, I mean, I shouldn't say this, if that had happened in New York, we would have tried to get a temporary restraining order the minute it started to crash into that building. Whether we could have gotten one or not, I don't know. But I think people in Washington were playing by a different set of rules. They assumed there would be hearings. They assumed there'd be a normal process. They assumed we had a normal president. We have a real estate developer. And so those of us who live in New York and know how real estate developers operate, that's what happened. You tear down the building as soon as you can, and then you figure it out.
Those of us in New York who were around when a certain tower was built on Fifth Avenue on the site of the old Bonwit Teller department store, and a certain developer promised to donate the very beautiful friezes, bas-reliefs on the facade to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which eagerly said they would happily accept them, and then demolish them instead because it was quicker, cheaper, and easier. We're not so surprised, I guess.
No.
Except it is that attitude would be turned to the White House.
Yeah.
I mean, Bonwit Teller, wonderful as it was a fine and elegant and much admired department store. It was not a national symbol.
Yeah, I mean,
and so
if the
other
White
level.
House is not safe in America
then what
today,
what is
safe?
What is, exactly, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Anyone with a question about, I hope, a happier circumstance than
There's
that?
a hand
that
over here.
Right there.
Oh, there's.
Yes. Oh, please wait for the mic.
Sorry, this.
We have someone already. Okay, good. Thank you. We'll follow with you.
Hi, I wanted to ask the question about the East Wing too, but part B is, do you think that visual had any impact on the elections last week?
The visual of the building being demolished.
Of the White House?
I think it may have. It certainly shook up a lot of people around the country. I think it will ultimately be one of those images that people will remember. And it has a great deal of power, and it got to a lot of people. Whether it has that much impact on the election, I'm not entirely sure, because remember, the elections were so limited in scope. The mayor of New York, the governors of New Jersey and Virginia were the three primary things at stake this year. It was an off year. But it absolutely has had a vast impact on public opinion. No question about that.
I would like to assume that the greater electorate is full of preservationists. So indeed, that is what swung the votes. That's probably not borne out in reality.
Right. Let's go to this side where I think a couple of people have been waiting. Yes, please.
So you guys have experience with the New York Times, and as someone who has been a journalist and has been working towards possibly writing for an outlet like that, what tips do you have for someone who wants to get into it? And, how were you guys able to come across those opportunities?
Well, the best way to write, to have a career in writing, is to write, and just keep trying. Follow Albert Bard's example of trying in 1913 and, staying with it all this time. Although let us hope that you do not wait 43 years to get something published. It's a hard situation today because, of course, journalism in general is a much weaker profession, both economically and culturally, than it was in the days when my career began and Tony's career began. I don't know that I've been very, very fortunate in my career. I don't know that I could have had it if I was starting now. And I say that not to be discouraging, because I want to be encouraging, but just that there are, the market for journalism is very, very different. It's fragmented. It's much smaller. Even the things that remain profitable are not vast money machines as they used to be. They're just hanging in there. I would also, by all means, try. There's so many online publications that didn't exist once, and that often do publish good work by writers who are not necessarily that well known or that experienced. So keep after all of that and keep trying, and good luck.
And I would say also, don't necessarily aim at the New York Times in a way. I mean, the New York Times back in the day, as preservationists, we would do anything we could to get a good story in the New York Times, or get a New York Times editorial. Fast forward to today, people ignore New York Times editorials. They're happy to run against them. And the Times doesn't have the influence it has. So I think there are other mediums to write that you may have more influence and impact than the Gray Lady.
Yeah, I think that's true. There is no, we don't have a common voice in this country. The hegemony of certain institutions. The Washington Post is much weaker than it was. New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, is very much still there and strong, but not what it was. The TV networks are not the same. Does anyone in this room remember Life magazine? And that was, Life magazine published something about you, everybody knew it. And now, there is, this connects very much to the factionalization of our culture in a broad way. It reflects the fact that, there is not a sense of common ground that there once was.
There's no Walter Cronkite telling us the way it is.
Yes, there's no Walter Cronkite telling us the way it is. And if there were, people would be screaming, it's fake news, or he's a liar, or what have you.
He's AI.
Right, exactly. So anyway, we have time for one more, I would think. Okay. Yes.
There's a mic coming right there.
Coming right there. Yes, thank you.
Getting back to the original subject, how is the state of preservation in New York City at the moment, especially when we read about buildings that are blowing in the wind and engineers who are dubious about their foundations, etc., etc. So could you please address that?
Do we have another hour? Is that?
Can we say this in 90 seconds? Let's see. The state of preservation is both good and bad in New York. The Landmarks Commission has an enormous inventory of protected buildings. We have a wide range of historic districts. We have been much better than we once were at designating not only places full of fancy houses occupied by rich people, but a wide range of architecturally distinguished neighborhoods all across the city, representing lots of different backgrounds and histories. So we've done pretty well with that. There's still, an enormous amount unprotected, and we see a lot of really crazy stuff happening in areas that are not protected.
Yeah.
And that you made reference to the building that, the super tall apartment house. Of course, if the Drake Hotel that had been on that site had been a landmark, we would not have this problem.
And it should have been.
And certainly could have been, yes, yeah. Exactly. So the report card right now is mixed. We're beyond a period where anybody would challenge the appropriateness of landmarks. It's been absolutely established as an essential part of our urban culture, we might say. But we are having a lot of battles over individual things, and we're also seeing it used, the struggle in some cases is, Tony, would you agree, is not entirely about the value of things preserved, but the fact that scale has become so big.
Yeah.
And people often want things to be landmarked, sometimes for the wrong reasons, to prevent something bigger and less desirable. I say that sometimes we don't preserve things because we love them so much as because we fear what will replace them.
And it's a well-founded fear.
Yes, it's a well-founded fear, exactly.
Yeah. No, New York is, more things are protected than ever before, but protection is weaker. You can be landmarked, but our Landmarks Commission is letting more things happen to protected buildings. But on a positive note, there is the established preservation groups in New York. Some of them are not exactly doing what they should, but a couple are. And there's some great new energy in preservation in the neighborhoods. So advocacy is alive and well. So there's hope for the future, but at the same time, it's 2025, and we're trying to save a church on the Upper West Side that there's no, it's like, why are we having to fight the same battle that led to the need for the landmarks law in the first place? I think there's a big hook that's going to come out.
Yes, well, you just uttered a phrase that could be a good final thing, which is not about the hook, about why we have the landmarks law, and all that. So
and that takes us back to Albert Bard, who we thank for having our landmarks law.
We might not have the landmarks law, and who did so much. And thank you all for being here, and please join me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Charleston Literary Festival, I'd just like to extend a huge thank you to Tony Wood and to Paul Goldberger for being with us here this afternoon. It's wonderful to have two true experts in conversation about Albert Bard and the culture of preservation right here in Dock Street Theatre, the oldest purpose-built theatre in the United States, right in the heart of the historic district of Charleston. So thank you so much for being with us. You can see both Tony and Paul in the signing lounge when you exit at the back of the theatre, and buy lots of books and have them signed. Before I let you go, I have two small announcements. One, the next session at 4 p.m. today will feature our Cato Fellows. So this year at the Charleston Literary Festival and last year, we offer a prize to two emerging writers from the Carolinas, from North Carolina and South Carolina. And so our fellows will be speaking at 4 p.m. right here on the stage. So please come and support them. It's a free session. It's a community session. Please come and hear these emerging writers from right here in the Carolinas. And then my second announcement is that the very last festival event this year, on November 16th at 6 p.m., will feature David Saloy and his novel Flesh, which, as you all know, just won the Booker Prize. And so we're very excited, so we encourage you to come to the next session at 4 p.m. to see the fellows, and to come on November 16th at 6 p.m. for the last session to see Flesh, and to every other session in between. Thank you very much, everybody.